Welcome back to the MOOC course on research writing. My name is Aradhana Malik and I'm helping you with this course. And we started with the module on literature review. In the previous class, we talked about what literature review was and how you actually start keeping the records of your literature. Now, in this class, we are going to talk about how you start reading, how do you take down your notes, what do you look for when you go through literature of any kind. Okay, so that is what we will talk about. It's very, very essential to know how to read. In addition to knowing how to write, it's very essential to know what to read, what to look for in any kind of paper. Okay, so let's see what we have here for you, reviewing literature. Now, before you start writing or before you start reviewing literature, you need to have a clear problem statement. You need to know what you are looking for. You need to know what it is that you want to find out. In the previous class, we talked about this, the table that I told you to make. Very, very essential. It's very helpful. So you need to know what you're looking for. And we did an exercise where we looked for information on how to, on research writing as a field. Now, so you need to know what your problem statement is. You need to list the research questions. You need to list your assumptions. You need to make a clear and detailed outline. You need to have a detailed annotated bibliography. So this is the annotated bibliography. This is the annotated bibliography here. So you need to have a detailed annotated bibliography, and then you need to organize your references. You need to match it with the outline that you have. Then you need to list your references in a separate document. I'll show you how each of these things is done. Very essential to keep record. So you need to know the first 2 or 3 things. You need to know what it is that you're looking for. You need to know what you need to find answers to. Why am I doing it? What do I need to find answers to? All these questions should be foremost in your mind when you are reading something, and your assumptions. And then you move on to physically doing the literature review. Now, this, as you read, this is whatever I'm presenting now is an outcome of personal correspondence with a senior professor at IIM Ahmedabad, and so this is directly from that correspondence. Now, and this is something that we all follow. Now, as you read articles using quantitative methods as the primary method for research, what you do is you note down the full reference. You first note down the complete reference, as in here. Here, this is a full reference. So you note down the full reference. Then you identify the purpose or rationale or justification. You find out why the question that was attempted to be answered was actually attempted to be answered. Why did the author spend so much time looking for an answer to the question that he or she asked? So you find out why the paper was written, why was the document written in the first place. Then you identify the research objectives. How did the author go about answering the questions here? Okay, so why? Research objectives. What did the author want to achieve? So what kinds of milestones did the author want to achieve in a quest to answer the questions that were asked here? Okay, and then you identify what the answers to the research questions were and what did they add to what was already known. So you identify, again, you will find all this information in the abstract. Excuse me. So you identify what the answers to each of the research questions were and how they added value or how they added to what was already known. Research is about creating value. Research is about adding to the existing knowledge base. So what did they find out that was not already known earlier? Then you study the conceptual framework used. What constructs have been used, and is the justification for the use of these constructs to study the phenomenon of interest clear? So what has been studied? What constructs, what concepts have been used? And in an attempt to find out what you wanted to find out, are the reasons for studying A, B, C concepts really justified, or should you have studied some other constructs in order to answer the questions that you were trying to answer? Okay, so you need to know whether the author really took the right approach in studying whatever the author was studying. Then, identify the propositions developed through the conceptual framework and study their translation into relevant hypotheses. Is the operationalization clear? Identify, so you find out what the author was trying to study, why the author was trying to study what the author was trying to study, and were the propositions or whatever the author proposed converted appropriately into the relevant hypotheses. Is the operationalization clear? Was the author able to convert the questions that he or she wanted to ask, or convert the way the questions were being attempted to ask? Sorry, can we please pause for a second? Yeah, I would like to do this slide again. इसको दोबारा से करना slide को. Thank you. So, now next is you identify the propositions developed through the conceptual framework and you study their translation into relevant hypotheses. Is the operationalization clear? You find out how this conceptualization has led to propositions. When we do quantitative methods, when we use quantitative methods, we are trying to either predict something or forecast something or generalize something or get some specific answers. So, in order to do that, we need to have clear statements, we need to have clear propositions. Now, what you need to find out is, have the concepts accurately led to these propositions or not? Okay, so that is something that you will need to study. Identify the steps in the research design. If possible, draw a flow chart to depict these. What was the research design like? What did the author do? So you use a flow chart to depict the steps in the research design. Then what were the methods of data collection used? What kinds of methods were used? Is the unit of data collection obvious? What kinds of data were collected? How did the author go and find out whatever he or she wanted to find out? What were the data points? What were the units of data collection? Why were they selected? How were they selected? And can you easily see from what is presented as to what these units were? Are the data screening procedures described adequately? So, when we go out and collect data, we also find out whether the data makes sense to us or not. At times, we need to filter the sense-making data from the data that does not make sense, which is purely information. So, we think we have found the data that we were looking for, and then we go through it, we evaluate it, and then we realize that some of the data is useful, some of the data makes sense, but the other part of it is just pure information. It is not real data that we can use for our study. So, you need to find out whether the screening procedures for selecting the sense-making data are adequate or not. And are these screening procedures described adequately? Is the method of filtering out the sense-making data from the data that does not make sense clear or not? What were the techniques used for data analysis? So, how was the data analyzed and why, and what were the techniques that were used? What methods were used to analyze the data? Then you study the findings or results. What are the conclusions drawn? Look for the linkages of what is said in the previous point to the rationale or significance described earlier. So, what have I found out? And why what I have found out makes sense. So, that is what is covered in the discussion of results. We will talk more about this as we move along, but you must study the discussion of the results. What have I found out as a result of this study? How have the results been presented, and how have the results been explained? Have they been explained in light of the literature that was reviewed, in light of the significance that was presented or not? Do they make sense to me or not? What are the limitations listed? Now, when you're reading quantitative reports, a significant number of limitations may be listed. Okay, so what are these limitations? Do they make sense to you or not? Are the ethics of the research described in terms of consent and disclosure? So if you're dealing with human subjects, are the or any living beings, are the ethics described, or how has the data been collected? Has it been collected through ethical means or not? And have these methods been described or not? Summarize the key claims of the study which you take up as premises for your own argument. So after you have gone through all of this, what do? You go back and you fill up this table. And then you make a judgment based on all of these points as to you're reading the quantitative articles. So you understand whatever has been presented, you make your notes, and then if you decide to use that article, then what do? You go back and you do what we did in the previous class. You write down all of this and then you move on. Okay. Now, as you read articles using qualitative methods, again you could have, I hope the people who are undertaking this or who have joined this course know the difference between qualitative and quantitative research. This discussion is outside the purview of this class, so I will not dwell too much upon it. However, if you want more details, I have a previous course which is freely available on YouTube. It's called Qualitative Research Methods, and there is a section there that talks about the differences between qualitative and quantitative research methods. So you can go through those lectures also. Anyway, so when you are reading articles that have used qualitative methods, what you need to do is you need to note down the full reference as you did in the previous type of articles, and then you identify the purpose or rationale or justification. Is the significance of the study apparent? Does it answer the question, why is this question important? So you find out what the significance of this article was. Is the tradition in which the study is located apparent? So again, you know, when we talk about qualitative research methods, we have a variety of traditions that we approach it from. So is that tradition apparent or not? Evaluate the information provided about the researcher insofar as it is relevant to the purpose of the study, the participants, and the site of the study. This is important because usually the researcher is the tool of data collection. And interpretivist traditions emphasize the explication of the researcher's bias and interests. So the researcher is a tool of data collection. You go out and you collect the data and you interact with the data, and that in turn influences how the data is captured and what is kept with you and what is left behind. So since the researcher himself or herself is the tool of data collection, it's very, very important to evaluate the information that is provided about the researcher. It's very important to list the biases, the assumptions that may have crept in to the collection, even at the point of collection of data. And again, that is part of qualitative research. We acknowledge that as an integral part of qualitative research. A good qualitative researcher dances between his or her own interaction with the data and the influence of his or her own interaction with the data on the data itself, and being an objective researcher and observing things from completely completely divorced from the situation. So that happens in qualitative research. Okay, so is the information on the site and participants adequate to derive a good understanding of the setting? So the information is the information where you have collected the data from and the participants adequate to derive a good understanding of the setting? Are you able to understand what is going on based on what you have interpreted from the setting or not? Okay, so we are talking about you reading an article that uses qualitative research. Okay. Excuse me. Then, what are the guiding questions? Is the process of question development made clear? Again, when we talk about qualitative research, we don't immediately start with research questions. The questions develop, the questions evolve as a result of this continued going back and forth, into the data setting. So it is an iterative process. We don't really start out with firm questions and then posit hypotheses and then go about either defending them or opposing them. Here in qualitative research, the process of development of research questions also takes up a significant amount of time. So, what are the guiding questions? Identify the gaps followed in the study. Note that iterative process of data collection or analysis are usually the norm. So, you go, you collect the data, you come back, you try and understand it, you realize you need more data, you go back, you come back and then you understand it, then you look at it, you evaluate it, then you go back, and so this dance continues. And you collect the data, you analyze it, you go back, collect more data, you analyze it, and that in turn, forms the bulk of your study. So, you need to identify the gaps followed in the study. How has one gap identification or one gap led to the collection of data and analysis of data, and how has that analysis led to the identification of another gap that could be related to the first gap, and so on. Are the data collection procedures, including recording or note taking, described well? In qualitative research, extensive notes need to be taken, extensive recording needs to be done. So, has that been described well or not? Are ethical requirements related to enlisting people and data collection described? Were any guidelines followed? Then, in a study involving other participants, what was the role of the author in collecting data? So, that is again, what did the author do? What was the role of the author in collecting data? How did the author go and collect the data? If there were other participants who were also involved in data collection and analysis, so what was the role? How did the author interact with those participants or distance himself or herself from those participants? Because in qualitative research, again, the author himself or herself becomes the tool of data collection and could be interacting with different stages of the process and influencing it in the process. Are the procedures used for data processing and analysis described adequately? So, how have you processed the data? How have you analyzed the data? What were the findings and how are they presented? What did you discover? How were these findings presented? How are they shared with the reader, and how are they described? How are they justified? What are the quality checks described, and how trustworthy is the study? So, again, in qualitative research, there are a number of checks that are prescribed, there are a number of checks that your study goes through. So, you need to justify the use of those checks, and then again, when you are reading qualitative papers, you need to find out how trustworthy the study is based on the quality checks that have been placed there. For instance, what are the member checks reported and how is the credibility of the interpretations established? Now, many times in qualitative research, what we do is we collect the data and a number of people interpret it, and then these interpretations are taken together and brought together and then understood together from different perspectives. So, this is called a member check. So, that means people who participated in the data collection again also become tools of collecting the same kind of data, and then the data is taken from various sources and it is triangulated, as we say. So, different sources of data bring the data together and it is looked at from various angles. Now, what is the check and balance to ensure that the data is interpreted in a similar manner? What is the briefing to the members who are interpreting data? How are they briefed? What are they told? Okay, so all that has to be, and all that is explained in good papers that have used qualitative research. So that is again going to be very, very essential to see. How does the study add to what is known about the phenomenon under study? Again, what is the significance? Why has the author spent some time studying the phenomenon that was studied? So, that is again very essential. Summarize the key claims of the study which you take up as premises for your own argument. So, while you are reading it, again what do? You go back and you put everything in here. Okay, and that is really the last part. When you read something, you must read it thoroughly, you must understand it as thoroughly as possible. So this is very, very essential, because once you, it takes about, it could take you about maybe 2 to 3 days to understand one paper. But the advice that I give to my students is that you must commit to writing 100 to 200 words about whatever new things, or whatever about the new things that you have learned during that day about your own area of research. So you read a paper, you read a part of the paper and record what you have written in terms of what you read and how it educates you about your own area of study. And you keep building a diary. It could be online. Online is better because you just keep adding to it. So you keep adding to it and you try and understand every paper thoroughly, because all of this forms the basis for whatever knowledge you're going to build later and the expression of that knowledge. You may be creating knowledge, but all that knowledge is of no use if you don't express it, if you don't share it with the right people, with the people who can use it. So that is why research writing is important. So you add to the knowledge base, and then in order to do that you have to first understand how the knowledge base has been created. You need to read both quantitative and qualitative papers. You need to understand what are the definite outcomes and what are the outcomes in the gray areas. Qualitative research deals with gray areas. So it is very essential that before you embark on any study, you need to conduct a review of the literature and you need to get the information from various sources. Whatever we have discussed in this class informs you about how to tap into those sources and how to get the maximum out of them. So again, this checklist may seem daunting. However, it is not. It is, once you get the hang of it, once you get used to looking for these things, it becomes, the process gets to be, it gets faster. But in the very beginning, you could take maybe again 2 to 3 to maybe even 5 days to read one paper. So that is where we will end this lecture now, and we will continue with some more understanding on how to write or how to read up and how to start writing your literature reviews. Thank you very much for listening.